Thank you for joining us at our June 2024 special board meeting. I am Leah Cruzy, board chair. Joining me are my fellow board members and colleagues, Vice Chair Jim Sandman, Secretary Shakura Adamafanian, Treasurer Chantel Wright, Carissa Stanley Beatty, and Nick Rodriguez. Before we begin the substance of our agenda, I'd like to recognize that we are at the end of the 2023-2024 school year, and one of the more joyful assignments that my colleagues, Dr. Walker Davis, the DC PCSB
Thank you, Chair Cruzy. Tonight's special board meeting is to discuss and vote on two important policies, the Aspire Policy and Technical Guide and the Charter Goals Policy. The team will share more about each of these policies later in the meeting. For more than 2 years, we have worked together on Aspire, which we see as an updated academic accountability model that's good for students, good for schools, and good for public education. It has been quite a journey to get here, as you well know. Aspire today is better because of the input that school leaders, families, school board members, experts, and members of this DCPCSB body have given. As you know, DCPCSB has been no stranger to high-quality authorizing and accountability. However, it is important to note that the Aspire system is aiming to do something that not a lot of charter authorizers have yet done. We have developed accountability tools that evaluate schools in the areas that DCPCSB believes are most important. This includes helping students grow, preparing students for college and career success, and building a learning environment that supports all students. Revising our accountability system supports DCPCSB's overarching vision that every DC student receives a quality education that makes them feel valued and prepares them for lifelong learning, economic security, and fulfilling careers. We fundamentally believe that schools should produce equitable outcomes for all students, ensuring that students from historically marginalized groups receive a quality education. Lastly, I'd like to remind you why we are revising our accountability system. Early in my tenure, we launched an ambitious process to develop a strategic roadmap which continues to guide our actions and represents the evolution of the role, function, and purpose of DCPCSB. Our strategic roadmap is grounded in the School Reform Act and our race, equity, diversity, and inclusion work. We developed our roadmap speaking with various stakeholders, including you, our board, school leaders, education partners, elected leaders, parents, caretakers, and others. We also examined academic data. During engagements, we heard the need to revise our academic accountability system, coupled with one of the leading experts in charter school authorizing, the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, stating that frameworks should maintain rigor and hold schools to high standards. We made revising our accountability system and the companion policy a goal in the Excellent Schools priority in our strategic roadmap. Tonight, we hope to conclude the exploration and development phase by requesting that this board vote on the policies that create Aspire. Thank you, Chair Cruzy.
Thank you, Dr. Walker Davis. Next on the agenda is public comment. At the beginning of every board meeting, the DC Public Charter School Board hears public testimony related to items on the agenda and listens to testimony for topics not related to any agenda items. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak, and if you need to make a few additional points, please email your testimony for us to read at public.comment@dcpcsb.org. Public officials who sign up to testify will be allowed to speak for up to 5 minutes. The hand-raising feature has been disabled. As a reminder, all written public comment is available to the public on our website. If you would like to register to provide live testimony or submit a written comment to the board, you can find all testimony registration and submission information on our website under the Public Comment tab at dcpcsb.org. You can also submit your comments to public.comment@dcpcsb.org or call our public comment line to leave a voicemail testimony at 202-328-2660 and select option 2. As we move through each speaker, Aisha and Courtney, our Zoom hosts for the evening, will promote each speaker from the attendee pool and unmute individuals speaking. All right, now we will hear from 2 speakers regarding our special meeting topic of the evening, Aspire. For that, first, we will hear from Kenyatta Robinson. You will have 2 minutes to speak. Welcome.
Good evening, Chair Cruzy, board members, Dr. Walter Davis, and staff. My name is Kenyatta Robinson. I am a proud graduate and the valedictorian of Friendship Tech Prep class of 2022. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with you about my part of the friendship experience that had the biggest impact. I just finished my sophomore year at LSU, where I received a full scholarship. Being so far from family and friends has been hard, but academically, my transition to college was an easy one. I had great teachers at Tech Prep and a great college and career counselor. I was a part of a supportive community that felt like family. When I was struggling, there was always someone there who knew me and who believed in me. But the real secret sauce at Friendship was access to the early college and AP classes. I took my first dual enrollment course in 9th grade, and by 10th grade, I was taking 2 dual enrollment courses in an AP class. I took many dual enrollment courses and many AP courses during my time at Tech Prep. By the time I got to college, I had valuable college credits, and I also wasn't surprised by the college workload and expectations because of my experience at Friendship. I entered college as a good writer, and I also entered college willing to do the hard things and to see a failure as an opportunity to learn. And to be honest, I didn't pass all my AP tests I took when I was at Friendship. Like AP Calculus, I had a great teacher and worked hard, but I didn't quite get there. But when I got to LSU, I retook the course and the material was familiar to me, which was much easier for me to succeed. If I had not had access to that course at Friendship, my first failure in calculus might have been at LSU, where the results of failing would have been more significant and costly. Because the Friendship provides all students access to early college courses and AP courses, beginning in 9th grade, I pushed myself to extend beyond my current capabilities. That stretch helped me succeed at Friendship, but it also helped me to succeed in college. It changed the trajectory of my education and my life. That's powerful. And it's the reason I'm here tonight. As you are making changes to the way you measure the performance of schools like Tech Prep, I hope you keep my story in mind and do everything you can to encourage schools to open AP and early college classes to help as many students as possible, as early in high school as possible. These early attempts don't always lead to passing grades or scores on AP exams, but they are critical in extending students' belief in what is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Kenyatta, and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you.
Next, Aisha, can we welcome up Patricia Brantley?
Good evening. My name is Pat Brantley, and I'm the CEO of Friendship Public Charter School. I am also a 30-year resident of the District of Columbia, and as such, I thank you for the countless hours you have spent to advance the quality of education in the city. As the head of Friendship with responsibility for nearly 5,000 school children and 1,000 staff, the accountability framework by which we are judged is extremely important to me, as are the values, outlook, perspectives, and competence of those you've chosen to shape and define accountability. And so I say this with true sincerity. I'm thankful that you have Dr. Walker Davis as the head of this effort. The development of Aspire has been difficult, challenging, and humbling, but also promising and inspiring. Dr. Walker Davis's authenticity, care, and thoughtfulness has been ever present. And because of that, and her willingness to hear from stakeholders, Aspire is better, more equitable, and more likely to drive higher achievement. In that vein, I'd like to share 2 thoughts on Aspire. First, subgroup performance and school-specific measures matter. This level of reporting will push schools to ensure students have the opportunity to academically succeed, regardless of demographics, type of learner, or background. Moreover, not only will the focus be on each child, but through the school-specific measures, also on the uniqueness of each school community. Second, while there have been many positive changes to the high school framework, the 2 metrics related to advanced studies seem likely to perversely incentivize schools to narrow access to advanced coursework rather than expanding such access. As structured, the advanced studies performance metric can benefit schools that limit participation to those deemed most likely to pass culminating tests. This is the most critical issue that you need to examine when you consider whether and how you approve the high school portion of Aspire. You can serve the purposes of access, opportunity, and performance for high school students by simply doing this: returning to the former calculation of advanced placement, IB, CTE, and dual enrollment that was included in the February Tech Guide, or approving Aspire with the staff's newly proposed advanced studies metrics, but tabling the technical definition and points for those metrics to allow the convening of a high school task force to examine the modeling and make recommendations. Again, my sincere kudos to you for getting this far. Thank you for listening and for caring.
Thank you, Ms. Brantley. Okay. Thank you to our public comment speakers for this evening. This concludes the public hearing portion of our agenda. Board members, all of whom are here together live and in person, may I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I move to approve the June 10th, 2024 special board meeting agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Secretary, would you mind taking a roll call vote for us?
Chairwoman Cruzy,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Sandman,
Aye.
Board Member Rodriguez,
Aye.
Treasurer Wright,
Aye.
Board Member Stanley Beatty,
Aye.
and I am an aye.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Secretary Adamafanian. I will now yield the floor to Melody Sampson, Chief of School Performance, Kirsten Floyd, Director of Data and Accountability, and Starling Temp, Goals Specialist of Data and Accountability, to provide some context about the 2 policies we will be discussing and voting on this evening that create the Aspire system.
Thank you, Chair Cruzy, and good evening, board members. DC PCSB has a long history of academic accountability. It is the heart of the public charter school and authorizer relationship. In our early years, each public charter school had its own accountability plan. In 2008, the board asked staff to create a more universal tool to evaluate school performance. The board aimed to improve the agency's, quote, ability to define high, medium, and low performing standards, and to clearly communicate the expectations, rewards, and consequences to schools, families, and communities, end quote. This comes from our annual report in 2009. After 2 years of engagement, research, and development, in 2010, DC PCSB launched the Performance Management Framework, or PMF. If you could go back 1 slide, please. Thank you. The PMF supported our school monitoring efforts, and eventually many schools went on to adopt the PMF as their charter goals, as enabled through the Elect to Adopt the PMF as Charter Goals policy. In 2019, DC PCSB began internal and external conversations about how to strengthen the PMF. In 2021, we committed to revising the PMF in our first ever strategic roadmap. Next slide. As I just mentioned, staff began to entertain conversations about revamping the accountability system in 2019. For example, I recall sitting in on a task force meeting that year in which elementary and middle school leaders pressed DC PCSB to adjust the PMF to better account for the variation in academic performance across student groups. Overall, DC PCSB staff, leadership, and school leaders wanted to revise the framework to evaluate student group performance, prioritize academic growth, further differentiate measures of school quality by framework, and expand, refine, or introduce new measures. Next slide. Over the past 3 years, DC public charter school leaders and local organizations that advocate for public charter schools informed revisions to our accountability system through small group listening sessions, surveys, and task force meetings. DC PCSB also partnered with national education organizations, including the Mid-Atlantic Regional Education Laboratory, or the REL, and the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, also known as NACSA. The following slides brush over our engagement activities with these stakeholders and partners, and I'll point out some notable touch points. If you're interested in a more detailed account of our engagement efforts, I encourage you to check out our website and review the materials that we prepared for tonight's meeting. They are available if you click board meetings at the top of the webpage. So this slide covers our earliest touch points, where we primarily focused on information gathering. For example, we held 26 small group listening sessions with school leaders, during which we inquired about the impact that the PMF had on their schools and their vision for a more equitable accountability system. Next slide, please. In 2023, we continued meeting with school leaders, this time through task force meetings, which has been a mainstay over the years in refining our evaluation tool. We held 10 task force meetings alone within the first 4 months of 2023. We also met monthly with the REL, getting technical input on various methodologies for evaluating schools. In October 2023, after settling on the revised accountability model, we held 8 in-person meetings with school leaders and data managers. We built these meetings as learning sessions in which we talked through the categories, measures, and approach to student group calculations. It was a hands-on learning experience, and we were grateful to meet face-to-face with DC public charter school educators. The DC Charter School Alliance and the National Charter Collaborative were generous in collaborating with us to co-host opportunities for Dr. Walker Davis and DC PCSB staff to engage with school leaders to answer questions about the revised accountability system. Toward the end of the year, we shared a draft of the technical guide with experts from across the country. I want to thank staff from the Colorado Charter School Institute, the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, the Alliance for Public Charter Schools, the REL, NACSA, as well as our partners at the Office of the State Superintendent of Education for being early reviewers and thought partners on the technical guide. Their input was truly invaluable. Next slide, please. So at the top of this year, we previewed the technical guide with school leaders just before asking this board to open it for public comment. Soon thereafter, we presented the charter goals policy to school leaders through another round of learning sessions and asked this board to open that policy for public comment too. As you can see, we held office hours in which we invited school leaders and data managers to learn about the proposed accountability system, encouraging them to ask clarifying questions. Our hope was to instill them with information they would need to engage throughout the public comment window, and engage they did. We held 3 public hearings on the proposed accountability policies, during which school leaders and advocates offered thoughtful, compelling feedback. DC PCSB staff wrestled with their input, making worthwhile adjustments to the policies and our practices. We just previewed these shifts with school leaders last week. Next slide. And next slide. The culminating product, of course, is the Aspire system, comprising 2 policies, the Aspire Policy and Technical Guide and the Charter Goals Policy. The Aspire Policy and Technical Guide details DC PCSB's approach to evaluating schools annually. The accompanying Charter Goals Policy establishes a means for adopting the evaluation tool as charter goals for reviews and renewals. The Charter Goals Policy also establishes the criteria for setting unique charter goals in lieu of adopting Aspire as goals. I will now turn it over to my teammates, Kirsten James Floyd and Starling Timp. They will discuss these policies in depth and summarize the adjustments that we made in light of feedback gathered during the public comment period.
Thank you, Melody, and good evening, Dr. Walker Davis and board members. very nice to see everybody. One of the first steps in the process of revising the PMF was to refine its guiding principles. DCPCSB staff and the board prioritized and revised those principles that align with our strategic roadmap, resulting in the following guiding principles. We will hold schools accountable for ensuring that all students meet or exceed high performance and/or improvement targets, acknowledging that an excellent school is equitable. We will reward high levels of growth for all students. We will provide a rigorous, attainable benchmark to measure school performance, and we will focus primarily on outcomes, both performance and school climate measures. DCPCSB staff made a deliberate effort to ground internal and external engagement in these guiding principles to drive the accountability work. At each decision point, DCPCSB staff used our mission, vision, and guiding principles to ensure alignment. These tables show some of the most significant shifts from the PMF to Aspire that DCPCSB staff is proposing. By increasing from 3 tiers to 5 levels, Aspire will make more meaningful distinctions between schools' performance and raise the bar across the board. Aspire is designed to increase the visibility of how a school is serving all of its students. As such, measures will now be calculated by student groups. Additionally, with respect to raising the bar, DCPCSB proposes setting statewide targets instead of sector-wide targets. Aspire will focus on chronic absenteeism instead of in-seat attendance, which aligns with the OSSE and the district's priorities. Next slide, please. It will use PARCS or DC CAPE 4+ data and set distinct floors and targets for state assessment proficiency and growth by grade band. Aspire incorporates multiple growth measures. Median growth percentile, or MGP, will remain part of the pre-K to 8 framework. State assessment growth to proficiency, a growth measure calculated by OSSE, and access growth for emerging multilingual learners have been added to the pre-K to 8 and high school frameworks. Aspire also offers bonus points for performance on school-selected nationally normed growth assessments. Overall, Aspire aims to place greater emphasis on growth wherever possible to ensure we continue to meet students' needs. For adult schools, in collaboration with the LEA leaders, we've made several updates to the adult education framework, metrics, and calculations to ensure that they capture appropriate outcomes, continuing to acknowledge that campuses that serve adult students have different measures of success than traditional pre-K to 12 schools. We've also expanded the earned high-level certification measure, which previously included just 6 high-level certifications. It now considers a broader range of certifications, including additional mid-level certifications. This approach is intended to encourage diverse programming and a more comprehensive picture of adult schools' contributions to preparing students for their future careers. Next slide. Aspire has 5 frameworks in the system that are assigned to each campus based on the students and grade levels they serve. Nearly every campus will be evaluated on their success in 4 main categories: school progress, school achievement, school environment, and a new category called school-specific performance. The measures in this category will measure qualities that are important to a school's mission or program. Schools will be able to select 2 measures for this performance category. Some may recognize that the proposed Aspire technical guide has similar performance categories as the PMF, but Aspire emphasizes school performance rather than student performance. It's important to reiterate that our board will use Aspire to make school oversight decisions. Again, the Aspire system evaluates campuses based on the grades and students they serve, assigning each campus a level by framework that describes how well it's serving its students. Generally, the grades a campus serves align to one framework, but not always. In some instances, a campus serves students across multiple frameworks. These pie charts show category weights by framework, and on the next slide by pre-K to 8 sub-framework. The pre-K only framework shows the heaviest weight on the school environment category because the 3 class domains make up nearly half of their framework. Studies show students make greater gains in key areas of school readiness, when they are in classrooms with more effective teacher interactions, as measured by class, an observational tool used to analyze the quality of student-teacher interactions in the classroom. As you can see, the high school and adult education frameworks show the heaviest weight on the school achievement category. One of the main reasons is the number of measures. The high school framework has 9 measures in the school achievement category compared to 3 in the school progress category. The adult education framework has 5 in the school achievement category and 2 in school progress. As the culmination of many students' public schooling, high schools are evaluated on how well they prepare students for post-secondary success. The high school framework measures whether students are meeting several achievement milestones across the 4-ish years of high school. The adult education framework is designed to measure how well schools educate adult students who seek to develop their reading, writing, and basic math skills, obtain a high school diploma or its equivalent, and or transition to post-secondary education and the workforce. Ultimately, have students gained the skills necessary to secure a job in a particular field, advance in their current career, or be prepared for the academic demands of attending college. We do capture growth towards many of these goals, but we mostly measure how well schools are ensuring students are meeting these goals. As I previously mentioned, Aspire aims to place a greater emphasis on growth wherever possible, which is most evident in the pre-K to 8 framework. The variations in total points by category are mostly due to shifting points when a school doesn't serve pre-K and thus doesn't have the class domains in their framework. Each year, DC PCSB will use the Aspire system to evaluate every DC public charter school campus. Each campus will earn at least one summative score that corresponds to an overall Aspire level. There are 5 possible levels, from level 1, exemplary performance, to level 5's unsatisfactory performance. DC PCSB will use Aspire levels to inform oversight and authorizing decisions, awarding high-performing schools eligibility to replicate or expand their programs, and closely monitoring low-performing schools. All schools, regardless of whether they have adopted the Aspire system as their charter goals, will be subject to the consequences for underperformance if they earn either a level 4 or a level 5 on Aspire. I will now turn it over to Starling Temp, our goals specialist, to discuss the charter goals policy.
Thank you, Kirsten, and good evening, everyone. As an element of our broader Aspire system, the charter goals policy supports schools in setting goals that will help them best serve their students and details how DC PCSB will hold schools accountable to those goals. As Melody shared earlier, over a decade ago, DC PCSB introduced its first policies pertaining to charter goals, the most notable of which was the elect to adopt the PMF as charter goals policy. Components of that policy have been purposely revised and incorporated into the charter goals policy. But this policy is ultimately broader in scope and serves several functions. 1, it consolidates and expands upon other existing DC PCSB charter goals policies and guidelines, creating a single comprehensive policy. Of course, it establishes a means for schools to adopt Aspire as charter goals, but it also details standards for individually negotiated goals, including setting appropriately rigorous targets, assessment selection, and developing corresponding business rules. It establishes goal attainment pathways for all schools for school year 24-25 through school year 26-27. And it retains all relevant content, for example, transitional goals, goal attainment pathways from its preceding policies, which are the COVID-19 impact policy and the current iteration of the charter goals policy. The proposed policy is broken into 3 distinct sections. The first section is about adopting and amending charter goals. This details how schools may elect to adopt Aspire as goals, individually negotiate goals, and amend existing charter goals. This section also provides information regarding the transition from the PMF to Aspire for schools that previously adopted the PMF as charter goals. We'll discuss that a bit more later in the presentation. Goal attainment pathways available to all schools for school years 22-23 through school year 26-27 compromises section 2. Notably, until school year 25-26, the policy offers all schools a pathway for goal attainment when demonstrating improvement in outcomes. We'll also discuss some updates to the pathway shortly, particularly as it pertains to school year 24-25. Section 3 discusses charter goals monitoring and consequences for underperformance. This details DCPCSB's practice in monitoring schools' progress toward meeting charter goals and the consequences for underperformance that may be implemented when they are not. All sections of the policy have been revised in some capacity in response to public comment. Let's next discuss some of those specific revisions.
Thank you. We anticipated receiving a large volume of feedback, and we did. All of the feedback gave us an opportunity to reflect and refine the policies and Aspire system. We heard public comment about the Aspire pilot year and timeline, floors and targets, student groups, bonus points, high school framework, adult education framework, charter goals policy, and DCPCSB staff's ability to implement the system and manage the data. DCPCSB's role as the authorizer is to set the policies and to create the conditions for school success. Schools are responsible for examining their programs in light of the policy and making changes if needed to them. It is a partnership with all of us playing an important role. After hearing from nearly all DC public charter school leaders during our 3-month public comment window, we have made changes to the Aspire system. Such revisions range from minor business rule updates to refining the student universe in a given metric, to introducing additional pathways for demonstrating goal attainment. The changes we propose are responsive to the concerns raised, particularly as they relate to needing time to adjust to the revised accountability system. I'll start by sharing our new plans for Aspire implementation. For reporting, we will not publish school levels or scores for school year 24-25. Instead, we will share only campus level Aspire outcomes, and that will not occur until school year 25-26. With respect to goal attainment, with respect to consequences, DCPCSB will relax consequences for school year 24-25 underperformance. Specifically, in school year 25-26, DCPCSB will not conduct an additional QSR or qualitative site review at schools receiving the equivalent of an Aspire level 4. Further, in school year 25-26, DCPCSB will use its discretion to determine whether to initiate a high stakes review for schools receiving the equivalent of an Aspire level 5. After school year 25-26, DCPCSB will follow the standard consequences for underperformance specified in the Aspire Tech Guide.
All right. As you saw in the prior slide, we've made some adjustments to the goal attainment pathways available to schools in school year 23-24 and school year 24-25. Here you'll see for school year 23-24, the pathways available to schools are largely unchanged from the current version of the charter goals policy. However, for the sake of continuity, DCPCSB has proposed including Aussie DC school report card performance as an additional pathway for goal attainment that is applicable to all schools, meaning any charter school that receives a summative score, regardless of having the PMF as goals or individually negotiated goals. In school year 24-25, DCPCSB will begin implementing the Aspire system. Pathways for goal attainment are distinct for PMF or Aspire as goal schools and schools with individually negotiated goals. When evaluating goal attainment based on Aspire levels, earning a level 3 or higher, meaning levels 1 and 2, is the defined threshold for determining charter goals as met. However, schools earning a level 4 can still meet their goals if demonstrating improvement in their score from the prior year. For schools with individually negotiated goals, if a goals target is not met outright, The goal may still be deemed as met if the outcome is improved upon from the prior year. As was just shared, you'll see two new goal attainment pathways for school year 24-25 applicable to PMF or Aspire as Goals schools to support the modified implementation timeline. The first pathway is transitional goals, but Aspire aligned, and the second pathway is the OSSI DC school report card performance. The transitional goals pathway that DC PCSB developed and utilized for school year 22-23 and school year 23-24 goal attainment generally included measures aligned to a campus's corresponding PMF frameworks, and those measures were calculated in accordance with the school year 19-20 PMF technical guide. To support DC PCSB's transition from the PMF to Aspire and reduce the reporting burden for both schools and DC PCSB, Aspire-aligned transitional goals will include measures applicable to a campus's Aspire frameworks and will be calculated in accordance with the Aspire policy and technical guide. However, the measures will be calculated at the all-student level and evaluated against state performance or sector performance when state is not available, or publisher-informed targets, as DC PCSB did for the previously offered transitional goals pathways. Down below, you'll see that DC PCSB proposes moving to a single pathway for goal attainment, either earning a level 3 or higher on Aspire or meeting individually negotiated goals targets outright, beginning in school year 26-27.
We heard requests for more details about the timeline to change the floors and targets. One of our guiding principles states that DCPCSB will provide rigorous, attainable benchmarks to measure school performance. We are proposing using school year 22-23 data to set floors and targets for 4 years. School year 22-23, 23-24, school year 24-25, and school year 25-26. Updating the floors and targets ahead of school year 26-27, DCPCSB staff plan to use a 3-year weighted average with 50% weight assigned to the most recent school year, 25-26, 30% to school year 24-25, and 20% to school year 23-24. DCPCSB staff propose updating the floors and targets every 3 years thereafter. There are a couple of exceptions to this with respect to school-specific measures. We'll set floors and targets in school year 24-25 for evaluation in school year 25-26 through 28-29, which is also 4 years. We will update floors and targets for school-specific measures in school year 29-30 when we update the other floors and targets. The other exception is for adult education student progress and the entered retained employment measures. Due to alternative scheduling will account for assessment changes and resuming the practice of collecting these data. We heard questions about the methodology for student groups. In December 2022, during an accountability task force meeting, DCPCSB staff presented multiple approaches to incorporating a student group performance into the accountability system to school leaders. Most attendees supported the approach of using floors and targets specific to each student group, citing among other reasons that OSSI uses the same approach in its accountability system. Our goal is to make student group performance visible to every stakeholder. Other statewide equity components compare performance between historically marginalized students and their historically privileged peers at the same school and are often used in places where those historically marginalized students are the minority. Students from historically marginalized groups make up most of the population DC charter schools serve, and yet the racial and economic achievement gaps prevail. DCPCSB staff seeks to compare a student group's performance at a given school to students of the same group at other schools. We are not setting an arbitrary standard or a benchmark for all students. That would otherwise result in targets that are not rigorous for some student groups and unattainable in the near term for others. Setting floors and targets unique to each student group acknowledges historical and current performance gaps between the groups. Comparing student groups to themselves instead of to other student groups gives stakeholders information about how schools are serving specific student groups across the sector. DCPCSB staff believes this information is key, particularly in a landscape of robust public school options. Since there is no all students group, a student's performance is counted each time they are part of a student group with at least 10 students eligible for a given measure. Generally, each student will be included in at least 2 student groups, economically disadvantaged or not economically disadvantaged, and 1 racial or ethnic group. Students identified as emerging multilingual learners and/or students with disabilities will also be included in those groups. In the high school framework, we received feedback to identify additional growth measures, give more weight to the school progress category, and reallocate points from the school achievement and school environment categories to the school progress category. DCPSB will reward high levels of growth for all students. That is one of our guiding principles. We researched how other states evaluate growth measures in their accountability plans and found that nearly every measure was not available in DC, or it was not included in their plan at all. With the introduction of school-specific performance, high schools have the opportunity to choose growth-focused measures, some of which will be included in the forthcoming school-specific performance measure bank. We also made additional adjustments to the high school framework. We adopted OSSE's high school growth to proficiency measure worth 15 points, extended the school selected growth bonus points to all grades a high school serves instead of just 9th and 10th grade. And we introduced 2 new bonus measures into the school progress category, ACT/SAT college readiness participation and advanced coursework and career certification participation. Now we'll turn to the adult education framework. Adult leaders asked us to adjust the school progress expectations, expand our adult education expertise, and revise specific business rules. We will propose that all adult education schools that use the CASAS or TABE assessments will have to transition to new versions in school year 24-25 for CASAS steps or 25-26 for TABE 13-14. When new assessments occur, we don't have data to inform setting floors and targets, so we will set them at 0 and 100 respectively through school year 25-26. This will apply to all of the AE school progress measures. With a floor of 0, every school has the opportunity to earn points. We also will hire staff or consultants with adult education expertise. We realize and recognize the value in such. And we revised the business rules and shared an updated document with adult serving schools last month.
DCPCSB creates policies and conditions that empower educators to do their best work in service of students. For the charter goals policy, we first and foremost heard school leaders ask for more clarification about the process and timeline for schools that currently have the PMF as goals to amend their charter agreements. All charter agreements for such schools will ultimately be amended to incorporate revised language aligned to a school's decision to either elect to adopt Aspire as goals or transition to individually negotiated goals. For schools that currently have the PMF and wish to transition to individualized goals, DCPCSB has proposed temporarily deviating from typical charter amendment restrictions by 1, waiving the prohibition on goals negotiations within 12 months of charter review or 24 months of charter renewal, and 2, by allowing goals negotiated during the 24-25 school year or 25-26 school year to apply to school year 25-26 and beyond, provided the charter amendment application is submitted by April 1, 2026, and that the goals meet the requirements of the charter goals policy. School leaders recommended that DCPCSB codify its commitment to continue offering discretionary provisions to aspire as goals schools. While a provision specific to schools undergoing charter renewal in school year 25-26 was already included within the policy, staff revised the policy to include language committing to the development of permanent discretionary provisions for schools that elect to adopt aspire as goals. DCPCSB will amend the charter goals policy no later than school year 26-27 to include provisions similar to the improvement and demonstrated promise provisions that were previously offered under the PMF as goals policy. School leaders expressed concern that DCPCSB consider schools that previously adopted the PMF as goals as having automatically adopted aspire unless and until the school opts out. Schools that previously adopted the PMF as charter goals have until April 1, 2026 to determine whether they would like to negotiate new individualized goals or formally adopt aspire. Staff revised the policy language to clarify how goal attainment will be determined in the interim, which does include evaluating pathways based on aspire level outcomes. DCPCSB will provide a rigorous, attainable benchmark to measure school performance. School leaders suggested that DCPCSB adjust the standards for individually negotiated goals to be less prescriptive. Staff revised the policy to do so by 1, removing the standard that a school must develop a school environment goal. However, DCPCSB maintains that schools should have measures related to achievement, progress, and the school's mission or unique programmatic offerings. Staff also removed the requirement for schools to have an ELA and math goal for every grade served. Staff has included the following standard in its place. All students and grades served by the school are represented within the collective suite of goals. And third, to account for school variability, staff revised the policy to set more general expectations for goal target setting. However, consistent with past practice, most schools with individually negotiated goals must have state assessment proficiency measures that aim to meet or exceed the state level proficiency rate. The approval of these policies is just the beginning. Implementation of the Aspire system is the next phase. In addition to the accountability team, DCPCSB's data team and external affairs team will play decisive roles in successful implementation. Following today's vote on the Aspire system, DCPCSB staff will focus on refining the processes for schools to develop and for DCPCSB to approve school-specific measures, one of the core components of the Aspire frameworks. This work includes onboarding consultants to support with negotiations and communicating logistics and supporting guidance with school leaders. We plan to do this by September of this year. Throughout school year 24-25, DCPCSB staff and consultants will engage in the process of collaborating with every LEA, with the exception of alternative accountability schools, to determine their 2 school-specific measures. Schools will implement these measures beginning in school year 25-26. Following the collection and validation of school year 25-26 data, DCPCSB will publicly report Aspire outcomes, inclusive of school-specific measure outcomes, for the first time in school year 26-27. The Charter Goals policy contains important information relevant to all schools. So what should be considered as DCPCSB begins implementation of this revised policy? For PMF goal schools, the policy provides guidance on the transition from the PMF to Aspire, including the decision timeline, lifted restrictions on charter amendments, and interim goal attainment. For schools pursuing a charter goal amendment as it relates to individually negotiated goals, the policy outlines minimum standards for new or amended individualized goals, including expectations on target setting, assessment selection, and business rule development. For all schools, the policy details goal attainment pathways available in the forthcoming school year 24-25, And the policy specifies that DCPCSB may initiate effective organization meetings with school leaders or board members in response to school year 23-24 underperformance on transitional goals measures. I will now turn it over to Will Henderson, our Chief Operating Officer.
Thanks, Darling. We are committed to offering tools that give insight into how Aspire business rule changes may impact Aspire outcome results. Aspire focuses on school performance, unlike the PMF that focused on student performance. We are replacing the calculator with a simulation tool that will model Aspire outcomes. We believe this tool, combined with impact analyses, will provide the necessary information to understand Aspire's impact on a given school. When it comes to data infrastructure, DCPCSB's data team is currently developing the Aspire system with a focus on data accuracy, reliability, and the user experience. Many of our updates that data managers will see in the hub are directly influenced by feedback we receive from those data managers. We are ensuring that modifications are tracked, managed, and communicated, and that they remain in alignment with the technical guide. DCPCSB is increasing collaboration with OSSI's technology systems and data assessment and research teams to strengthen the transfer process for the OSSI-owned data we will use in our Aspire system. Furthermore, your individual LEA's data insights partner has been thoroughly trained for the Aspire Systems business rules. They are ready to support data managers throughout year one of Aspire implementation. I also want to remind LEAs to be on the lookout for the 2024 academic production cycle timeline in the coming weeks. I will now turn it over to Tamika Bowden, DCPCSB's Chief of External Affairs.
Good evening. The External Affairs team has developed a robust, comprehensive, multi-year communications and engagement strategy aimed at reaching a diverse range of stakeholders. Using a three-pronged approach, we plan to continue to connect with school leaders and their boards. We will also meet with parents, policymakers, agency partners, lenders, funders, media, and more to inform them about Aspire, educate them on the components, and lastly, engage with them. We do not anticipate the engagement phase taking place until the end of next year. This slide shows some of the stakeholders we have already met with and those that we will connect with this summer and early fall. Next slide. Since May of last year, we have held many meaningful engagement opportunities ranging from small group breakfasts with Dr. Walker Davis and school leaders to more recently hosting focus groups and one-on-one meetings with parent board members, school communications marketing teams, and a lender to learn about information and resources they will need to better understand Aspire. We've also met with our Parent and Alumni Leadership Council, or PALC. They've been an invaluable resource that has offered a lot of feedback along the way. Schools will continue to receive our quarterly message from Dr. Walker Davis that celebrates achievements and gives insights on our priorities. We also, in April, launched Aspire Connection strictly for school leaders. This e-newsletter is one tool solely dedicated to sharing updates about Aspire. We will continue to regularly distribute Aspire Connection through early September. There's also a dedicated section about Aspire in our weekly newsletter, Wednesday Bulletin, that comes out every Wednesday. If the board approves the policies, we will share a few materials through a toolkit, videos, and more this week. And we will also use our social media, website, and monthly newsletter, DC Charter Schools Now, to share and educate about Aspire. And more importantly, in early 2025, we will share an updated toolkit that will have template letters for schools to use to share information about Aspire with stakeholders. School staff can expect to hear and get a deeper understanding about Aspire in a variety of different ways. This includes written materials like our Aspire Connection, but also more importantly, we're planning trainings. Some will be virtual, others will be in person. Thank you.
Chair Cruzy, this concludes our presentation, and we are excited to receive questions from the board.
Thank you, Dr. Walker Davis. Thank you, team. We will begin with a discussion about the Aspire policy and technical guide. I'm going to open up to the floor. Chair Salmon.
Do you have any response to the point that Pat Brantley made earlier about disincentivizing access to advanced programs in high schools?
Thank you for the question. This is a developing conversation. It is something that was brought up recently. As I mentioned, these new advanced coursework measures were introduced this spring. And what we realized was how we previously calculated advanced coursework in the PMF was not aligned to our guiding principles. It would prevent us from reporting on student group performance. And so we looked at alternatives. And what we came up with was a measure that includes all students at a school. So all students in a high school are included in the denominator. All schools that participate in advanced coursework are included in the denominator. The concern is, rewind, the research says exposure matters. The concern is if students are younger than expected, 9th grade, 10th graders that are participating in advanced coursework, they may be less likely to pass the test. And the measure is based on who takes the test. So the exposure matters. It also is accompanied by a participation rate measure, which says if you are in any grade level except 12th grade and you're taking a course, you get credit for that. We believe that it's important. So the question is, what is a better way for us to calculate this measure? Right now, we believe this is the best way to calculate it. If a student participated in a year's worth of advanced coursework and they take the accompanying exam, the assumption is you've taken the necessary coursework to pass the exam. And we realize that's not always true, but not including students because of their grade level didn't feel like it was appropriate. So what I have said, or what I communicated with high school leaders about, was our openness to looking at what the data looks like for this coming school year. We have this, what we've been calling pilot year, where outcomes will be reported by measure next year for the next year, but this school year 23-24 data is not going to be public. And we will still be able to discuss with schools what those outcomes look like. And so that's been my kind of message, that, or our message, that we are open to, if something looks like it doesn't align with our guiding principles, our mission and vision, we would be open to making adjustments as necessary.
Thank you for your very thoughtful and clear response. I think your approach is very reasonable, particularly in light of your willingness to revisit based on results. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, let me say what I imagine many of us are thinking, which was that was a long and detailed presentation, and I think it represents a great deal. Just, I don't, maybe it doesn't quite represent the sheer amount of work you all have done. But I think for those of us who have been here for the last 2 years, just sort of seeing everything that you all have done, the feedback you've taken, the way you've taken a detailed and nuanced approach to everything. I'll say this again later, but just thank you to all of you for everything you've done. Thank you, Dr. Walker Davis, for the way that you have, I think, engaged everyone and just sort of been such a figure in leading this. And you saw, I think, in the testimony, what I think a lot of school leaders, I think, feel about your leadership in this. I have one technical question about the approach to measuring student group performance. So one of the things that I think worried me the most in listening to the public comments was a critique about this approach. And the commenter said that, you know, interpreted a certain way, the approach might be seen as setting lower expectations for historically marginalized students because of, I think, differentiated floors and targets by school, by student group. So would just love to hear you comment on the merits of that claim, you know, why we believe in this methodology. And then a third thing I'd say, and I go back to something you said, Kirsten, about was it available here, but several people suggested the use of some kind of index. And I think we heard that feedback, but we're deliberately not going in that direction. So I'd love to hear kind of why we decided on that as well.
Thank you for the question, Nick. So at face value, it may look like we are setting lower expectations for different student groups. It may look like that because the numbers are different. We did not arbitrarily create the numbers. We have consulted many external organizations. We worked with the REL, as Melody mentioned. We've talked to NACSA and others. And this approach acknowledges that all student groups perform differently and are performing differently. It's not just based on historical performance, it's based on current performance. So the 10th and 90th percentile of statewide performance are the range of how that student group is performing in DC right now. The idea is that by setting the target at the 90th percentile, knowing that we have many schools that are not there yet, that they will have an opportunity to improve. Our guiding principle says setting rigorous and attainable benchmarks. So we want it to be rigorous, but we also want it to be attainable. If someone else is doing it with the same student group at that 90th percentile, it is possible for others to do it. So that's first. We believe in the approach. We have stood by it. The numbers may look different. They are grounded in actual philosophy. With respect to an index, yes, there are other places and states and accountability systems that use something like an index. And so usually an index is a summary of points, a summary of different data points together that kind of neutralize them in order to compare schools with each other. And as I mentioned in our presentation, often these indices are used in places where students from historically marginalized groups are in the minority. And so how schools are serving those students who they don't have a lot of is important to them. And they have identified that that is the best way for them to calculate that, measure that. Shifting from the PMF to Aspire, we decided that it was really important to make student group performance visible explicitly. With creating something like an index, it can still mask what the outcomes look like. And we want to spark improvement, innovation, and conversation about what is happening.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, well, I want to add one other thing, which I remember hearing one of your colleagues tell me in an earlier meeting. I just want to make sure, just state for the record, make sure this is true. First of all, if I'm a school, I should expect the vast majority of my targets are in fact some distance from where my students are performing now. So I should expect, I'm sure that won't be true in every case, but that it will be a stretch to get there. And therefore there will be an incentive for me to improve the performance of all students in all student groups. I think that's one important point.
Yes.
And the second thing would be that, of course, there are those schools that are in the 90th percentile for whom that won't be true, right? Or 90th or above. And that's for state, not sector, which I think is important. The second thing I want to sort of just get on the record is the idea that, well, any given student is usually a member of at least two groups. And therefore, the likelihood that a school is sort of meeting all expectations for a student with every group that they're in is even lower than that. And therefore, a school will have a reason to pay attention to every single one of its students in every single school year. And I think that's the principle I think I was worried about. And so I just wanted to kind of hear a validation of that I've read that right in the guide.
Absolutely. There was some conversation at one time about if this incentivized just focusing on a particular group of some sort. Each student group has a weight. Each student group has floors and targets. They are different. And in order to get to a high score in aspire, you have to be performing well in all of the areas with all of the student groups. So there isn't really an opportunity to ignore or not put in the effort on any particular student group. Additionally, with a weight of 40% for the students who are economically disadvantaged, we are prioritizing that group. And that is a deliberate decision that we made as an organization. And so hopefully that has communicated to everyone how important it is for improved outcomes for those students.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Good evening. I have lots of questions. So first, I do want to just echo what Nick said, and I think everybody up here feels the same. The work is incredible, the fact that we're here. Also, just want to highlight that we as a board have really dug in deeply with you all on a regular basis. Believe it or not, we have read the guide, we've read and we've detailed as well. So I would like that on the public record. There you go. So first, very impressed with the response to public comment in terms of like what we've done, what we've heard and what we've done. Is that public? Is that document public in the same way? So I would encourage anyone watching this to definitely go through, because we have responded literally to everything that we've heard. Very impressive. Can you talk to us specifically about how you came up with the new implementation timeline? What did you think about? What did you consider when coming up with this proposal? That's the first. And Will, one of my questions is for you.
We wrestled with how to address that question, and it was the question that we heard the most from school leaders throughout the 3-month public comment period. I think it probably took us a good 3 weeks and some very hard conversations to figure out how we wanted to approach it. But what we landed with was prioritizing the need to share some public information about how schools were performing under this new system, with also wanting school leaders to have adequate time to get adjusted to it. And so that's why we wound up proposing publishing measure outcomes for every campus in our portfolio, but not publishing Aspire levels or scores. And then also relaxing the consequences that we would apply to schools for underperformance, as well as identifying additional pathways for charter goal attainment that did not involve an Aspire level or Aspire score. So it made the stakes a little bit softer for the first year, but still, again, gives the public an opportunity to see how schools are doing under this new system.
And so when you think about that, the other piece that I heard clearly with this was this concept of relaxed consequences. How do you respond to that, and particularly in public, right, where you have a parent in the school, they don't care that you're relaxing consequences, right? These are their children, their most important people. What does it mean to have relaxed consequences, and how does that look if we do indeed find that a school really is struggling and we need to take action? I think everybody knows I believe strongly in accountability in exchange for the autonomy we're given. So what does it mean to have relaxed consequences?
Well, first, I think it's important to know that the DC PCSB is always looking at indicators of performance across the board, whether it is academic performance, compliance. So we are constantly monitoring school performance and interacting with school leaders as we see appropriate. When it comes to our response to underperformance under this particular system, I want to just put an emphasis on the word relax. It means that we are creating opportunity to have conversations about the performance that we're seeing, but it doesn't mean that we are completely turning the cheek. You will notice that particularly for schools that are identified as level 5, we have maintained your discretion to intervene as you see fit. So if we do see some truly alarming outcomes within the first year, we will absolutely intervene and potentially engage in a high stakes review if we see that it's necessary.
And I think that's important, because I don't want it, while we want to be mindful of rolling this out in the proper way, we do want to also make sure it's underscored, we understand our role as an authorizer and what that means. Sterling, my next questions are for you. One of the things I saw in the presentation was that with the charter goals policy, there's no improvement provision included now. but that was something that we were going to revisit and revise in 26-20. Why not just do it now? Then, like, we're right here. Why are we waiting?
Yeah, so I'll clarify first, there is actually a provision specific to schools undergoing renewal in 25-26. We just don't have any schools undergoing renewal before then. And we know that renewal is the time where there is the least discretion for continuance. In terms of the more permanent provisions, it is really just an opportunity for us to see more Aspire outcomes before we actually develop those provisions.
Thank you for clarifying that. And then I was confused on slide 34, when it came to individually negotiated goals, it said something about removal of math and ELA, and there would be something that said like all students in grades. Can you voice over that again? And I don't know if it's appropriate to put it back up, but that was concerning to me. I don't understand that.
Yep, I can clarify that piece. So the public comment received was.
Yeah, can you put it back up for us? It was slide 34, yes.
Okay. So we received public comment that said the minimum standards for individually negotiated charter goals were too prescriptive in aligning all categories to Aspire and then requiring things that are misaligned with the frameworks in Aspire. So the standard that we removed was the requirement for ELA and math goals for all grade levels served. This is specific to pre-K to 8 schools, and the requirement would have meant developing ELA and math goals for their early childhood grades. And this is not aligned to the Aspire frameworks that do not include early childhood outcomes as scored measures. So instead, we've generalized that requirement to say all students in grades should be represented somewhere within your goals. You can still have measures for your early childhood grades for school progress, but just not requiring it if it's not a measure that's required in Aspire.
Is that language too broad? Why didn't we just exclude pre-K 3 and 4?
Yeah, we still have a separate minimum standard that aligns with the SRA that all state assessment tested grades must have state assessment proficiency measures. So we know those will always be incorporated.
Okay, so basically pre-K through 2 could not include math or ELA, and we're okay with that?
That's aligned to what we say in our system.
Okay, well, I'm not aligned with that. Thank you.
Okay.
That's concern. I mean, I do get it for 3 and 4-year-olds. I really do. But at some point before the state test, we should be looking at how children are moving on ELA and math. Okay, and then my question to Will, our system is very dependent. Thank you for putting that up, Aisha. Our system is very dependent on getting data from OSSI. And I want to make sure that that's also noted on the record. It's not like the data is coming to us, we're holding and storing it, right? We're dependent on OSSI for a lot. How are we, I know you talked about the simulator system, but how are we preparing for that? And then putting my former school leader hat on, what does that mean for a school? So let's assume DC Kate data comes out, should come out August to September, whatever, of OSSI. How soon can schools expect Aspire, and this could be for everybody, but Will, I put it on you because you're talking about data, but how soon can they expect? Is it within 60 days we should know and be able to simulate something for PCSB? I guess that was short. 60 was short. Okay, not 60, but but seriously, right? Because I'm thinking about from a school leader standpoint, with that level of dependency, is there any kind of estimated timeline that they should know and be able to react to?
Thanks, Ms. Wright. The it's very important to note how dependent we are on OSSI. The Aspire is on OSSI. That's a critical point to make. And I may punt to Kirsten here, but I think it's important to note that PCSB seeks to transparently outline what the timelines will be. And so as we, as OSSI's timelines and data sharing content with us, as they share content with us, we will work to make sure LEAs know when they can expect that. And Kirsten can share more specific details about that.
Yes. It will not be 60 days, but we're dependent on OSSI for several measures, and those measures get calculated, or the data. So let me just give you a rundown. Students take a test in the spring, gets sent to the publisher. They do all the scoring and such. They send the data back to OSSI. OSSI cleans it and does all of those things. And this year they are instituting a new process where we won't get embargoed results, but they will certify those data with schools. So they send those data to schools, all the students, here are the students you're being held accountable for, here's what their outcomes are, here's all their demographic indicators, is this all right? And then the school says yes or no. And once that happens, then we get the data. So a school has to verify that it's correct first, right? All of those data points happen at different times because we have access for EML students, which is a test that's taken in late winter, so January, February. That's a different schedule. We have AP exams, those are a different schedule and a different publisher. So we're talking about the College Board there. We have SAT, ACT, which comes out at different times. We have graduation rate, which considers summer grads. So we don't actually get graduation rate until like October, because it's not just about the students who are graduating right now. It's about the students who are earning their additional credits over the summer, and they won't graduate until July or August. And then that happens. So because all of these timelines are different, we have to wait until the last data set is available for us to be able to compile the complete Aspire system to give the outcomes to schools.
So 2 follow-ups. One, will you, as the data comes, will you start to compile it in like on a rolling basis? Okay, so then if I'm listening to all of that, what that sounds like to me is that we would not then be sharing Aspire outcomes probably till January, maybe even February, March. Okay, so I want us to be aware of that, because what that also does, if I put my parent hat on, right? And I heard my parent right here next to me say, right? If I put my parent hat on, I may have enrolled in or applied for a school, even accepted a seat at a school that I could then find out, possibly post my requirement to accept, that school either has or has not met performance. I think that is something that we should plan for, be aware of, and watch as closely as we can, and keep us and the public informed about what that means to continue to push our state agency, and also to make sure that we have the systems internally to respond as quickly as we can upon receipt of that data. Because now that is very different. That is also a very different timeline than what we are historically used to with PMF and being able to make school selection requirements.
Chair Kuzi, if I might. Treasurer Wright, I just wanted to add a couple of things there. We made a conscious decision to move to data, to being more dependent on OSSI, because we are making a lot of state comparisons, whereas under our performance management framework, we made a lot of comparisons of data across the sector. And I do think that that is a key part of our guiding principles, that we want to understand how students in charter schools are performing across the state compared to schools across the state because parents have so many choices in the District of Columbia. The point that you just made, though, is we are dependent on a sister agency to get that information. And I feel like we've made a lot of progress working with OSSI, underscoring the importance of both of our accountability systems, that they offer robust information, different information with different stakes attached to it. And my goal is to continue to work so we get those timelines closer and more seamless. And our ideal goal is that we would be in a position, not next year, but sometime in the future, to have that data closer to when parents are making critical decisions around EdFest time, certainly during the school lottery period. And so that is already on the radar for the OSSI team, that is what we're trying to work toward. And we're going to use the goodwill that we've built this year with OSSI's team and also better understanding of what those needs are to get closer to that. And then regarding the communication for our LEAs, we have historically published a timeline for data collection and validation. And we have begun to seed with schools the importance of getting information timely from each LEA, because that is important for us to be able to publish scores that are relative comparisons to every LEA. If we're waiting on 3 LEAs for information, that means we can't give you any individual LEA scores in comparison to the rest of them. And so this is going to require all of us to get used to practices that we were very used to in the past before COVID, to get used to new practices that are necessary for the implementation of this. And certainly my attention is on the capacity that we have internally to make this happen, and the partnerships that we have, in this case, particularly with OSSI, to make sure that we have what we need. But your point is well taken and important, and it's going to take a lot of communication in this first year to make everyone understand what's necessary for this to work.
And thank you for that, Dr. Walker Davis. That was my point of putting it out, not to go for one way or the other, but to also just understand we are still one city. And I don't think the onus is just on PCSB. What I'm saying is, as a city, we've got to make sure we're giving all the stakeholders the information that is required in a timely manner to make informed decisions. Because what I don't want is that then come March, we have an influx of people saying, well, why didn't you tell us? And why didn't we know? And the onus is all us. I think it is a joint effort, and we should all be watching it carefully. And as citizens, we should, and residents, as residents of the district, we should be also supporting that as well. But I do think it is equal, and not a but, I think it is equally important just to highlight that for us, Aspire would come out at a time that our sector has historically not had it come out so much later. And I do get it because of the state versus the sector, but I want to make it explicit, because what I don't want to hear is like well, we didn't know, because I know how it felt to even just want your now DC Cape scores, right? Like you just want to know. And I know LEAs just want to know as well. Okay, my last question before I let someone else talk. How are we, I know it's written, I know we're saying it, but I always also then think about, I put my hat on again, as a single site school leader, I may not have somebody who can sit in meetings after workshop, after task force. How are we communicating to schools explicitly and directly their timeline for election of either Aspire individually negotiated goals? Meaning, are we being as explicit as I work with this set of schools, so I'm reaching out to these 10 to make sure they know? Because I'm thinking about that small school that's struggling. Well, you know, those single sites that like have to do everything versus having a home office that can show up in a different way.
I can start by saying that, take an example of the learning sessions last week. My team is responsible for not only setting up the space, but also whenever schools take an attendance. So there's 5 schools that didn't show up, and today we reached out to them to find out what's going on, how can we support you? And we're going to follow up with the video of today, video of last week. So making sure we check open rates on Aspire Connection. So we're trying to make sure that at least all the information that we are putting out, they're able to touch it. In the fall, we're going to have training. So that will be another opportunity that we're going to just delve deeper with the data folks, the comms, the people in the individual schools that need the support to be able to have them know what they need, like to be able to have them delve deeper into the Aspire, recognizing they won't get it all in one session. We're looking at multiple sessions, but once again, taking attendance, following with them, maybe calling you to say, hey, can you call a school leader to find out what they need or who on their staff can help support here? So I'm going to pass it on to others because I know there's more that's happening.
Yeah, I think one other thing that I mentioned a moment ago as well, that each of our schools has an assigned data insight partner that can handhold them and walk them through that. Each of them are very familiar with the tech guide. That's a part of their work. And so it doesn't matter how big or small you are as an LEA, you have an individualized experience through a data insight partner.
And I will wrap up the answer to this question. One, I'll say we have many touch points with schools throughout the year. I'm the person who reviews their annual reports. I am the person who works on reviews and renewals. And we are about to embark on school-specific measure identification with all of these LEAs. Also within the policy, we said we will prioritize schools that are coming up with their charter review or renewal to make this decision. And also, like I said, every single school that currently has the PMF as charter goals, their agreement will need revised. So there's stake in the game for us and them to have touch points and ensure that they have the information they need to make their decision.
Thank you all. Thank you, board.
Thank you, Board Member Wright. This whole exercise is really helpful, and I'm grateful for the questions. I'm grateful for the responses. Tamika, I have a question for your team. I have heard, we've begun to discuss a little bit of it tonight, and you mentioned it in, I think, slides 40 and 41. I have heard from LEAs and from LEA boards some anxiety over the last few months around other stakeholders. We primarily focus on students, we focus on parents, we focus on LEA boards, of course, school leader feedback. But there are other stakeholders like funders, like lenders, that schools are concerned about. Can you repeat for us again, kind of what the sequence is to ensure that the broader community of stakeholders who may not be as familiar with some of the changes that are happening, and how we will inform them and ensure they understand the implications of it?
Yes, thank you for the question. We are approaching our communications and engagement work in 3 phases. The first phase that we will embark upon, pending the outcome of this vote, is the inform phase. That is speaking directly with lenders. We've sat down with one at this point just to ask questions around what it is that they need to know. What is it they currently know, and what is it they need to know going forward, so we can provide information that's available for them. Funders is another group. We're also talking with a lot of the outside organizations. So that would be in addition to NACSA, but that's SERPI, that's City Fund, that's Credo, Ed Trust, and the media, of course, but more importantly, we're looking at the parent groups, breaking them down to not only just parents that sit on boards, but parents that are leading their PTA, PTOs, parents that are civically involved, whether it be with PAVE or our parent leaders in their schools. Same way with the community space, we're breaking them down in terms of ANCs, but also the ones that lead the civic associations or have very influential spaces in their communities, very concerned about what accountability or school evaluation systems look like. From the education space, as Starling mentioned, we are looking at schools based off of schools that are using PMF as goals versus those that are not, because they're bringing a different lens to this work and how they're looking at this framework. So we are looking at those particular schools differently. And we have already thought about parent board members, but also looking at talking directly to the members that lead up the accountability or academic subcommittees on their schools boards as well. So we've tried to do a diverse way of trying to talk to every different stakeholder that either school leaders mentioned or through feedback sessions we heard, or groups that we need to talk directly to, recognizing, like I said before, it will not just be one touch point. This is a lot of information to give you in 50 minutes. So recognizing we need to come back multiple times to first just give you the facts, then follow with a little bit of Q&A, and then ultimately consider you to be a participant that is going to understand what information you receive in 25 looks like, how to use it, and how to engage with it.
Thank you for that recap. It's thorough.
Yes, I have a question, or I'd love to hear you all talk about the simulator tool. That was one of the things that I heard in the comments from the feedback that we received from the school leaders. Could you talk a little bit about how you've built out the tool, when you think it's going to be ready for the community, just in terms of overall readiness, and what have you all sort of implemented or heard from the feedback session and incorporated that into having the tool be ready?
So to clarify, we have not built the simulation tool yet. That's a part of this next phase, what we'll do. It's important to note that, and as we have elevated in various different ways to LEAs, that this is not a calculator. This is not the same thing that they have experienced with PMF. It's a simulation tool to help them get a better grasp of what's occurring with their data. So we intend to engage with our LEA partners and make sure we feel clear on what is most helpful to them, and also educate our LEAs on what we can and cannot do. This Aspire is more complex than the PMF, and we believe that inevitably that will be good for the sector and for our students in the long run. But this tool, which we think we have or we believe that we have a path plotted to create a helpful tool, will be one where we engage with them and make sure we're training them on what we can do and hearing from them about what they want to see in this document or tool.
I just want to add really quickly to what Will was saying about the complexity of the system. So when we had the PMF, it was based on all student performance, and there were a set of measures, and you put in your performance for that measure, and it spit out and the floors and targets were in there already, and it spit out your score, right? How does my performance change for all of my students for this one measure or each measure? And then that's what happens. With the introduction of student group performance and newer measures, we have, for each measure, you can have up to something like 12 different rates to be considered. So you have economically disadvantaged, not economically disadvantaged, emerging multilingual learners, students with disabilities, and then you have Black, White, Asian, Native Hawaiian, American Indian, 2 or more races. That's 10, and I might have missed some. So for each, and with respect to race and ethnicity, it's based on the N size at your school in that measure. So you also have to know how many students are in that group that took that test or whatever is included in that measure. So the amount of inputs that are required for something like a calculator like we previously had becomes very complex and taxing, and our commitment is to making sure that we provide something that's useful and not cumbersome. To your point, Treasurer Wright, about single site LEAs, when you have a single site LEA and there's a teacher that's also acting as your data manager, he or she does not have time to gather all the data points, to put them in the calculator. Additionally, something like that, you introduce a lot of human error, you like all of these other components, right? So finding a way to create a tool where schools can toggle with what already exists or have a slider of some sort, that kind of thing is what we're thinking about. We also are really aware of having the ability to set what your school is. So if I decide that I want my percentage of certain students to be counted this way or that way, if I don't want to have enough of that student group to show up in my framework, right? Like you need to have at least 10. So if I only have 7 students with disabilities and I want to keep it that way so that their performance doesn't impact the rest of my measures, then we are trying to ensure that the tool is used for positive purposes. We understand the necessary or the need for someone to say, or someone to look at how performance might impact their Aspire outcomes. We don't want it to be a tool where they can craft the school and performance that they want. Does that make sense?
I have one more thing to add. I just want to also make a distinction between a simulation tool for schools to determine resource allocation for programming versus a tool for information purposes for board members or parents or public, right? And so we are going to be working on a simulation tool. And at the same time, we still need to have discussions about what are the displays that we're going to have of the data? What does our new quality report or whatever we're going to call it look like? Will we have an interactive dashboard that's less static? Those are all of the things that we'll be determining and building over this year. But that is different than the simulation tool that LEA leaders will have so that they can determine how do I resource for the upcoming school year. I noticed that we have a challenge with performance for this particular school group or across this particular grade. And so therefore, we're going to resource and staff differently. That is what we hope this tool will allow decisions to be made in the long run, but that is different than what parents might need, because I think that they want information, just how's the school performing? How's the school performing with students that look like my student? And that's a much easier and user-friendly tool perhaps than a simulation tool that an LEA leader would use.
Okay. So thank you for that. And I acknowledge the complexity of the tool, and I appreciate you clarifying that for the record. And so I just want to be clear for the record. The tool is being built and the team is appropriately messaging the timing of the tool and what it can be used for with educators. There's messaging being done around that.
I think the truest way to say that is the tool will be built and we will message appropriately.
We have one more comment from another board member, but okay. Secretary Adamafania. Actually, hold on one second. I think you were going to move to something else. Did you have a question? Please, we're going to pause on this one. Let's have the question.
So I have a question, but I really want to give space to Dr. Walker Davis and the team. Today is June 10th, right? But we may vote, well, we will vote, but the work is going to begin, right? It doesn't stop. It's not like you're going to go home and rest. Well, hopefully you'll rest tonight, but the work will still continue. And I've heard, and you've heard, a confidence question about PCSB and whether or not we're ready to implement 5 different frameworks. Sean, what you got? Why are you ready?
I can start. I'm looking over on the other side of the room. I know why I'm ready. You just heard from my team, so I know why I'm ready. This team has been working tirelessly, and you only see 5 people sitting in front of you today. There are so many more people who have been engaged in this work behind the scenes. They don't get the glory. They get all of the tough questions and all of the long hours, for sure. So the first thing that I want to say is I have confidence in this team. Secondly, you see a nice glossy presentation in front of you today. You don't see the countless deliberation meetings that we've had. You don't see all of the preparation that's going on behind the scenes. You don't see all the conversations that we've had with experts and consultants and all of the pieces that we're lining up, the resources that we're moving around to ensure that we're ready for implementation. I take this work very seriously. This team takes this work very seriously. We deleted many more slides than we actually showed today to give evidence of the work that we are doing. And I think about this not just about the technical aspects that need to be in place for us to engage, the analysis to produce the tool, but also you heard from communications, you heard from the data infrastructure that needs to be necessary for us to do this. We already have a draft timeline for the next 2 or 3 years that we haven't presented here yet, and that we will be refining. And for me, I don't want to use my closing remarks just yet, but for me, the work is not done. I think many folks who are in school leadership know, no, we don't get the summers off. And PCSB does not get the summers off either. In fact, we'll be working really hard to make sure that we have what we need and that school leaders have what they need to start the year off right. And for this to be the first year of implementation that we all intend it to be. So I feel very confident about that. I think school leaders know that my door is open. If there's a question that they have, they can certainly ask me, but they can also ask any member of my team. If there's a concern that they have, they can bring it to me for us to really assess if there's something that we can do about it. But I feel like we have created an environment where we can hear and really work toward creating a solution, because at the end of the day, I want to see all of our schools do well. Those who are struggling, I want to see them improve. I believe that our residents deserve it. Our children, our youth, our adult learners deserve the high quality experiences that I know charter schools can provide for them. And I feel confident in the team that is before you and the ones that you cannot see in our ability to execute on this Aspire system.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker Davis. Secretary Adama Fanian.
Thank you, Chair Cruzy. My comments are comments. They are not questions. I believe I've peppered you all and had many questions along the process, but wanted to, for the record, do a couple things. Number one, just like my fellow board members, extend incredible gratitude to you, Dr. Walker Davis, the team, school leaders who have engaged in conversations, my fellow board members, all of our stakeholders who have made it a point to share their voice to help shape what I believe is sort of the next phase of education in the city. I'll say this, and I know that you all, especially our staff team and our school leaders know, this work wasn't easy, but it is so necessary to just the future of education in this city. I think about my former students, their children now. Because they all have kids and I don't know when this happened, but I think about them. I think about my own daughter. I think about my nieces and nephews, and I think about sort of the position that DC is now in, again, driving change and really, really trying to put our, not just our best foot forward, but put our, what is this saying? DC is trying to put their money where their mouth is. That's what I'm trying to say, right? And so, Kirsten, I think you said something that really touched my heart, and I'm going to hold very dearly. Making visible students who have been invisible, frankly, for quite some time. And I think censoring our most marginalized population, like that's the purpose of this. And again, this team, this board, our school leaders, once again, we place DC at the forefront of change. And I'm really excited to see what comes of it. It's gonna be hard. Gonna have some hard and tough conversations, but our students, our city will be better for it. And so I just wanted to say thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And to our school leaders who are listening in, it's gonna be hard a little bit, it will, but when we are celebrating 50 years of you being in this city doing incredible work, and your students as grandparents are coming back and talking about just the impact that the education has had on not just their life, but the trajectory of all the members of their family. When we do education work, I deeply believe we do generation shifting work. And so when those young people become older people, more seasoned folk who sit before us and talk about just the impact of how this high quality education changed their life and the lives of their family members, we will all feel proud about this moment. So kudos, Melody and team, y'all know how I feel. Kudos, and I hope you lay down somewhere after this. But good work. Thank you.
Vice Chair Salmon, please.
I don't have any further questions. I just want to commend and thank the staff, everyone, but especially you, Melody and Kirsten and Starling and Will and Tamika and Dr. Walker Davis. It is not possible to design an academic accountability framework that makes everybody happy. That is an impossible task. What you have done brilliantly is to balance competing interests and to design a system that is simultaneously rigorous, reasonable, and pragmatic. I particularly want to commend you for the work that you did in outreach to stakeholders. The breadth and depth of the work that you did is astonishing. I'm referring not just to the number and the nature of the meetings you held. It was the respect you showed to stakeholders. You listened to every comment. The number of accommodations that you made, you reacted to what you heard. And if you didn't agree with what you heard and you didn't make changes, you explained why. You gave people the courtesy of a response. I think what you've done is to model what every public servant should aim for in serving the public. I can't imagine a job better done. And I want to give a special shout out to Dr. Walker Davis. You are an extraordinary leader. We would not be here tonight without your leadership, your wisdom, your clarity of vision, and your insistence on rigor. Stick to that. We are lucky to have you in the position that you're in. Thank you.
Cosign. Double cosign.
Well, I think since we're maybe perhaps getting towards a vote, I did want to say one or two things about why I'll be voting yes on the Aspire framework and why I'm in support. We might have reached that point in the discussion where everything has been said, but just not everyone has said it yet. I'm going to try not to do that. I'll try to say one or two things about why I think it's important that we move forward. And I'll have something separate to say about the charter goals policy, but I think it's important to note that the two of them together comprise this system. You can't read one without reading the other. And I actually think a lot of the public comment touched on that without us necessarily knowing it. And then I think we realized that it was only by making changes to both that we could feel comfortable with both, as it were. But so if we were to just take the framework itself, I just want to note, again, I'm going to go back to some of the things I said when we opened it for comment. There are certain things we're keeping the same. That is a commitment to rigor. That is a commitment to high performance. And I think, as Vice Chair Salmon said, not only did you explain when you disagreed, but you held the line on the important things there. Things that I know were tough for our friends, the school leaders, to hear sometimes, because it's going to make the system tougher, right? We are raising the bar in a lot of different ways, and I think that matters a lot. Secondly, I want to go back to this idea of making every student visible. The framework, I think, prioritizing equity. I'm not an absolute expert on accountability frameworks, but I've seen a few kind of here and there around the rest of the country. And I actually think one thing that made the task so hard was the commitment to include each of those student subgroups and to say that it mattered that we are asking every school to perform well with every single subgroup. And I think there's actually no easy way to do that if you're really going to call out each of those categories. And so really, really commend the work that you all have done to think about that. And I think this really represents that. So those two principles, rigor and equity, are the things I think that we're holding on to. And I think there are a couple things that we're doing in addition to that that are important. One is we are, really making sure that I think the framework rewards, and rewards schools that are able to do well with the students that need it the most. We've talked about that a lot over the last several years, where we've had school leaders come in front of us and they've said, don't penalize, us because of sort of who we serve or who we are focused on serving, as it were. And I think this framework does that. It's a hard set of trade-offs, but I think it gets that right. And then, of course, there are the school determined measures, which I think are really, really important. And I think that is an innovation here that I think is going to be yield and I think bear some great fruit. And then finally, there's all the other things you've done to listen and to respond and to make sure you're really, I think, holding the space and held the space for this community over these last several years. So congratulate all of you on a job well done, and really excited to vote for the technical guide.
Thank you, Nick. Would anyone else like to offer some comments? I want to recap some of what's happened over the last couple of years. I will be voting tonight to approve both the Aspire policy and technical guide and the related charter school goals policy. On January 10th, 2020, our then board came together with DCPCSB senior staff for a mini retreat in the then DCPCSB office in Columbia Heights to discuss the future of the PMF. We discussed the philosophy of the PMF. We explored correlations between student profiles, as well as similarities and differences between PMF and OSSE STAR. We reflected on the common beliefs we had heard about the PMF, school feedback, and discussed areas where the PMF felt out of sync with the board's vision. While yet much was to be discussed, that board was aligned that we saw an opportunity to revise the framework this agency is using to inform decision-making so that the board would have a more complete picture of how well schools we have authorized are serving their students. A lot's happened since January 2020. The board that called for a revision to this framework also at the time ran a national search for the right leadership to steward this agency into our next chapter. We found the best leader we could have ever imagined to do that. That person, Dr. Michelle Walker-Davis, joined us in August 2020. Over the ensuing months, she led an exercise that refreshed our agency vision and mission, established our first strategic roadmap, and jumped right into the multifaceted and complex exercise of revising this agency's framework to measure school performance. Change management is not easy, especially when the crux of the change is technical and when there are moving parts with dependencies and incomplete control and when there are high stakes implications. Tonight's vote will be a milestone, but it's not a destination. It's the start of a next phase of implementation, only some of which we can forecast with precision. This next chapter calls for a thoughtful and engaged period of implementation, never losing sight of the truths. That change takes time. Our schools are full of and led by incredible educators and leaders, and students don't really have time to wait. What gives me confidence to vote in favor of the Aspire system tonight and the charter goals policy is the thought and care that has been poured into it by the staff, the very careful review and pressure testing by my fellow board members, by the hands-on engagement from technical experts, and from school leaders and parents who have raised voices along the way. Thanks to all of this engagement, what we are voting on tonight is stronger, and all those who played a role in informing its design have a part to play so that the outcomes we all seek for students become real, especially for students farthest from opportunity. Even when it hasn't been easy, we have not lost sight of our responsibility and who we are doing this for, the current and future students of the District of Columbia, because they are worthy of dignity of access to a quality education that puts them on a path of lifelong learning, a fulfilling career, and economic independence. As I've said before, this agency is leading the nation in walking the talk on equity leading excellence. I believe in the potential of our schools, and I am so proud to be part of this next step for our schools, our students, and our city. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's do this. If no other questions or comments, I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the Aspire policy and technical guide.
I second.
Secretary Adam Lafanian, would you mind taking a roll call vote?
Happily. Here we go. Chairwoman Cruzy.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Sandman.
Aye.
Treasurer Wright.
Aye.
Very dramatic. Board Member Rodriguez.
Aye.
Board Member Stanley Bailey.
Aye.
And I am an aye. Okay.
Congratulations, congratulations.
All right, on with the meeting, folks. Now we will discuss the charter goals policy.
So Starlene, I had an opportunity to ask a question about the improvement, so thank you for forwarding that. Given what Board Member Rodriguez said, you've got the guide and you've got the policy. How do folks know when they need to go to which for implementation? Can you give us some understanding and guidance there?
So first and foremost, when it comes to adopting goals, which again, all of our PMFS schools will be going through, and that is a majority of our LEAs. This is an important resource about what it will mean for you to elect to adopt Aspire, or if you are transitioning to individually negotiated goals, what those standards will be. It also applies to all schools as we go beyond just now when they look to make charter amendment requests. It has relevant information pertaining to that process. It outlines goal attainment pathways for the next 3 years, but after we go forward with our next iteration of the policy, it will extend those academic continuance standards beyond 26-27. So it will be a permanent place to understand what your goal attainment standards are. And then of course, it emphasizes the processes for our SRA obligation to monitor schools' progress toward meeting those charter goals. So to understand all of the different ways in which PCSB engages in that annually. And then of course, if we're not meeting progress towards our charter goals, what happens to my school? What interventions can DC PCSB initiate to support my school, or in some scenarios, initiate further action? So it really takes you through the whole process of defining charter goals and then what happens with those goals afterward.
So I should understand, if I'm a LEA, it's not just about understanding Aspire and the technical guide. Even if I adopt Aspire, this goals as policy, the charter, you know what it's called, that the charter's goals policy will always be something that I should know, understand, because it's going to impact day to day, or not necessarily day to day, but the life of my LEA.
Both of them, right? So the charter goals policy speaks to a school's individual charter and how they define their standards for review and renewal. And the Aspire technical guide, policy and technical guide, talks about how we, as the authorizer, are evaluating schools annually and reporting on those data and what those things are. So any school is subject to the evaluation that is done by both individually negotiated goals or Aspire. So it's important for all schools. Both things are important for all schools. Neither is exempt from another.
Just a quick follow-up. It was made mention that this policy will be in place until the revision. Can you all just speak to when are we anticipate the revision of the policy, just to give folks a lens and spec?
Yep, so the current version of the charter goals policy took us until now, and took us through school year 23-24. This revised version of the policy takes us from next school year to 26-27. This allows us 3 years to transition into the implementation of Aspire, better understand it in practice, better understand the outcomes across the sector. And then once we all, us and schools, have more information, then we can amend the policy to include long-term standards and those permanent provisions. So we anticipate the next update to be somewhere before the expiration of the policy in 26-27. So we have more outcomes and prior to where this policy takes us through in that final school year.
Excellent, thank you.
If I could follow up on that, if I think about the two documents together as a system, we've talked about things that, well, first of all, lots of feedback about this idea of a pilot, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I think lots of bits and pieces we've even talked about tonight on, for example, the high school framework and, early college credit and things like that. Things that need to be worked out as we live out the experience. How should we think about revisions generally or adjustments generally to the Aspire system? On the one hand, I've heard some of you say, whoa, like we're not reopening all of that, right? But on the other hand, I do want to acknowledge and create space for this idea. We're going to learn things as the data come in, and we're going to need to make adjustments. And so how should school leaders be sort of prepared to think about that? How should we be prepared to think about that as things get brought before us?
I just want to say, Nick, I'm the one who said no. I'm the one who said, whoa. We're not doing this every year.
So you're right that like we have to give these policies an opportunity to breathe and sort of live them out. That's the point of being able to have a pilot that is more relaxed, that has lower consequences for underperformance. However, school leaders in our portfolio are very accustomed to, and former school leaders can attest to this, are very accustomed to seeing PCSB staff make recommendations to adjust components of the Aspire, formerly the PMF. So it is commonplace for us to scrutinize the measures, scrutinize the floors and targets, scrutinize the way we set floors and targets, and to have those engagements throughout a school year, evaluate the outcomes, and have conversations before coming before the board to potentially make revisions. And so that includes the technical frameworks as well as the charter goals policy. We are just finding the right balance between letting those policies breathe so we can see what they do, but also being responsive to what we see.
Well, I do think that's important. And if those things happen in the same spirit you've engaged up to this point, right? I think that should give all of us a lot of confidence. It might not be the same volume, right? Because we do need to let those policies breathe. But as things come up, we can expect that we'll have those debates and discussions about what we're experiencing and what adjustments need to be made. I think that's important. Thank you.
If we have no further questions, colleagues, I'll entertain a motion.
Well, can I say one more thing then? Just
Please.
I sort of split up my kind of statement
Oh,
into
do your
two
thing.
things, saying why the Aspire. So this is me talking plenty, so my apologies. I just want to note that if I think back to the public comment period, right? We were opening public comment to the Aspire guide, but most of the public comment, it turned out, if I just really go back to it, was about this charter goals policy. Because the charter goals policy is what actually brings the Aspire framework to life. It tells you when the consequences will happen. It tells you how goals will be negotiated. It tells you, and in this case, it tells you what the pathways to goal attainment look like in each year. And I do want to note this because I think when the feedback, for example, came back about pilots, it turned out that it was, in my mind at least, really feedback about the speed of the phase-in and what it was going to look like, right? And I just want to acknowledge the amount of responsiveness that you as a team have shown, I think, to the field in looking at that. And I think this was a tough one, I think, for me, I think was for a lot of us, because I think there are at least two interests to balance here. One, giving schools time to adapt and prepare, and the revision that we just talked about when stuff goes wrong, that we can make adjustments. And then on the other hand, making sure that schools are in fact accountable for performance. something that is kind of not entirely, but at least somewhat been on hold for the better part of 4 years now. And so after spending a good amount of time with both the policy documents and this great team that's been developing them, I can say with confidence that I think the revisions you all are proposing with the charter goals policy are really what strike this balance well and admirably. And so I think that, when we vote for this, we're voting to create the system, as it were, alongside the guide. One that's, I think, rigorous and equitable and fit for purpose. And I know there are some who would prefer that we wait a little bit longer. I understand that. I don't think those comments are being made in bad faith or anything else like that. I do want to note, though, that we have already extended this process. It's been 2 years intensive, and if you look at that timeline, 4 years kind of total that we've been engaging on this. And so I do think it's time for us to move and time for us to think about this, because our parents and our families and our students can't wait, right? They need this to be able to know what they need to know about their schools, to be able to make informed choices each year, and ultimately, hopefully, to have a system in which schools know what targets they're aiming at and are trying to achieve those, so there are more better options available for every student. The last thing I'll note, and a few folks have touched on it thus far, is that we all agree now that the hard work once we pass this policy, we'll have done the second hardest thing. And it'll be on to the first hardest thing tomorrow or perhaps the day after. And I just want to, implementation is incredibly important. And some of the things I've heard from stakeholders echo what's been talked about here. First would just be how we communicate about the framework. So I think, Tamika, about what you said around the communications plan and explaining to the public so that new data aren't misinterpreted. I think schools are rightly worried about that. And I think making sure that we're saying, oh, well, it was a 3, it was a tier 1. What does it mean now? That there's going to be a lot of explaining to do, not just by us, but we have to do our part, I think, and play that part, that bridging role. What Chair Cruzy said about lenders, I think that's another thing that comes up on people's mind a lot, other stakeholders like that. I think in the end, this is a core purpose of the framework, right? If I think about when I came to DC and entered this system, tier 1, tier 3, tier 2, those were just parts of our lexicon. They had worked their way in so that we all kind of understood what they meant. And there was enough of a consensus that it really served to underpin the system. We need to get to a point where levels 1 through 5 represent that for people as fast as possible. And I think that's all going to come down to implementation, engagement, and communication. And then the second bit, which has been touched on by several of the questions, is this idea of what tools we're putting in the hands of schools. So the simulation tool and explaining how it's, maybe, I don't know, better than a calculator, but the best thing we could do with this system and why and how. What can we do to equip and empower our schools as best as possible in order to make sure that they feel like they have what they need to see the target and then, have a clear runway towards hitting it. So I think that's the challenge ahead, and we look forward to kind of engaging on that in the weeks and the months and the years to come. But again, thank you to all of you for all of your hard work.
Thank you, Nick. I will repeat the statement I started earlier, but I'm glad that you made the comments that you made. These are important points and good reminders as we step forward to June 11th and beyond. So with that, colleagues, I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the revisions to the charter goals policy.
Second.
Thank you, Secretary Adamafanian.
Chairwoman Cruzy,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Sandman,
Aye.
Treasurer Wright,
Aye.
Board Member Rodriguez,
Aye.
Board Member Stanley Beatty,
Aye.
Chair, I am an aye.
Excellent. Congratulations. I will now yield the floor to Dr. Walker Davis to give some brief remarks.
Thank you, Chair Cruzy. Now that I can breathe a deep sigh of relief. These revised policies, as has been stated, are an important step forward. And I want to thank this incredible staff at DC PCSB who devoted countless hours to develop these policies. They dug into the data, they tested out concepts, they researched key points, asked for honest feedback, posed tough questions, and responded to my many questions and requests. I thank them for all that they have done, and I could not be more proud to lead such a passionate, dedicated, and competent team. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My cheeks are hurting from all the smiling that I've been doing tonight. This is really a testimony to the work that you have done. I also want to thank our school leaders. We know for sure that Aspire is better today because of your thorough review of the proposed policies, your candid feedback when we wanted it and sometimes when we didn't ask for it, and your active participation in all of our sessions, task force meetings, and more. While we did not always agree, I do believe that we have a closer bond today because of our shared commitment to get it right and to ensure that every DC student has an opportunity to succeed. Lastly, I want to thank this board, the collective body, and each board member. You set the conditions for this work. You rolled up your sleeves, you asked thoughtful questions, you raised points to gain a deeper understanding or simulate our thinking. And you too were unwavering in your commitment to student visibility and excellence. I am keenly aware, and I want to reiterate, that an accountability system alone will not change outcomes. Only a joint effort involving families, teachers, schools, and the entire education can do that. That includes important partners like OSSI, DCPS, DME, and several education support organizations. It includes us staying steadfast in our commitment and the work that we have done. And most of all, it involves our students walking into each classroom with the joy that they bring and us seeing them and honoring them for what they bring to our school communities. The approval of this policy isn't the end. That's been stated before. The work is absolutely not done. It is just the beginning. It will take time for all of us to get used to this system, but we have to approach student achievement with urgency. We anticipate we're going to learn things, and that means that we all have to give each other grace while we take the time to adjust to this new system. Again, I have deep appreciation for our school leaders. You are doing the heavy lifting every day, and we've created the policy and conditions for student success. I thank everyone who's been involved in getting us to this moment deeply. I look forward to the great things that we're going to do together, and I'll say simply, let's get to work.
Thank you, Dr. Walker Davis. Board members, is there any new business? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the June 10th, 2024 board meeting.
Second.
Secretary Adama-Fanian, one last one.
Chair Cruzy,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Sandman,
Aye.
Treasurer Wright,
Aye.
Board Member Rodriguez,
Aye.
Board Member Stanley Beatty,
Aye.
Chair, I'm a right. Not a right. I'm an aye, sorry. Oh, God.
Good night.